Hi friends, welcome to Taming Python series. In this video, we're going to talk about how to do directory listing in Flask. So directory listing means something like this, where you expose a folder of your server to the browser. So here is an example of a directory listing. If I go to the URL localhost 50/reports, I am being shown a folder in my local computer. So this is my local folder and this is what we have been showing. So I can even navigate to the folders, and if I click on the files, we can download the files and we can go to the parent folder by clicking this parent directory link, and we're able to see the modified time and the size of each file and folder. So what's the use case of directory listing? If you have a bunch of generated reports or images in your server and if you want to make that display to your user so that they can browse through and download the required files in that folder, then directory listing is a very good option because users can navigate through the folders and download the required files, and the data transfer is unidirectional. That means the users can only download the files but they can't upload the files in case of a directory listing. Directory listing is not inbuilt in Flask, so let's try to implement that. So just like in the example I've shown, let's try to expose this folder from our Flask server so that user can see in the browser and download the required files. So let's get started with coding. I'm going to take a blank folder. I'm going to open it with VS Code. So let's try to create a basic server. So I'm going to create a file called server.py. So this is a simple Flask server. I've imported Flask from the Flask module, created an instance of the server, made the server to listen at localhost port 50/100, and if user visits the root URL, we are returning hello world. So this is a very simple Flask server. So let's try to save it and run this. So I'm going to open localhost 50/100 and I got hello world. So our basic server is working now. Alright, now that our server is ready, let's try to create the directory listing feature. So if you want to expose this folder, let's try to copy the path of this. I'll just copy the path of this folder and paste it here. I'm just going to name this as a variable called base folder path. And since I have backslashes, let's try to make a raw string. So let's try to create a new root. I'll just copy this simple root, copy paste here, and I'm going to write reports. So if user visits the reports URL, he should be presented with the list of files and folders. So I got my base folder path. How can I get the files and folders in this path? For that, I'm going to import the OS module. I'm going to write import OS, and if you do os.scandir and give the path of your base folder, you can get all the files and folders in this path. So I've created a variable called fnames and gave it os.scandir. But the problem is that scandir will give a list of items which are not names but which are path objects. So I'm going to use the string interpolation to extract the name out of each item. So I'm going to write x.name for x in os.scandir of base folder path. Alright, now I got the list of names. I need to render these list of file names, right? So let's create a template for that. And I'm going to create a new folder. I'll just name it templates. And I'm going to create a new file. I'll just name it files.html.j2. So now instead of returning hello world, I'll just return a render template. So render template is to be imported from the Flask module. And inside this render template, I'm going to write render template of the name of the template, which is files.html.j2, and I'm going to pass a new object called files equal to and the file names. And let's try to render the files as it is in our template. Let's try to go to the URL called localhost 50/100/reports. Alright, I've got an error here because I'm using the same function name. I just need to rename the function, so I'll just write the function name as reports. And let's try to run this again. So let's try to go to the URL localhost 50/100/reports. I got not found because I need to write report slash here, and let's try to reload this again. Now we got the list of items inside this folder. Now that we have listed our files, let's try to list out the modified time and the size of each file also. So for that, just using x.name is not sufficient. So let's try to create a function here. I'll just create a new function called file object from scan. So I'll just write f object from scan, and I'm going to pass in the object which I'll get from scanning each file item in this base folder path, and from this I have to derive the file size and the file timestamp also, right? For that, you need to use the x.stat function, which gives the statistics of each file which I've scanned in this folder. And let's try to make it a variable called file stat, and let's try to get the file size. For that, you can write file stat dot standard underscore size. This will be the size in bytes. Let's try to name it f bytes, and let's try to get the last modified time of the file. So for that, I'm going to use filestat.st_mtime, and this is going to give me the POSIX timestamp of the last modified time of the file or folder. So let's try to name it as a variable called ftime, but it will be a POSIX timestamp, right? I don't want to use a POSIX timestamp. I want to use a human readable time string, right? So for that purpose, I've created a small utility function which is going to use the datetime model. So I'm just gonna import the datetime model here, import datetime as dt. And what it does is that it will take the POSIX timestamp, which is in seconds from Unix epoch, and convert it to a string which is human readable, something like year, month, date, hour, minute, seconds. So let's try to make f time as get timestamp string of filestat dot standard modified time. So instead of getting a number, I'm going to get a nice readable timestamp string. And here I got also another problem where if the file size is something in like kilobytes, you'll have a very big byte number. So if the file size is big, you have to show it like kilobytes or megabytes, and if the file size is small, you have to just show bytes. So for that, I've written a small utility function. So this is a utility function called get readable byte size. So if the file size is more, it will give you sizes like megabytes, gigabytes. If the file size is less, it will just give you bytes. So instead of making it filestat.standard size, let's try to have get readable size of filestat.standard size. So it will not give you a number, it will give a readable string like kilobytes, megabytes, something like that. So we got our file name, bytes, and time. So let's try to make it as an object and return it as a result of this file object from scan. So let's try to return the object. One attribute will be name, which is x.name, and another attribute would be size, which is f bytes, and another attribute will be m time, which is the file modified time, and it's going to be f time. So instead of returning x.name for each item, let's try to return file object from scan of x for each item inside the folder path. So I'm going to save it, and now let's try to see the results here. So here you can see name, size, modified time of each file item is present here. But now showing it as a list is not comfortable to see. So let's try to render it as a table. So to render the list of file objects, I just created a small table where I have the header called name, modified time, and size. And I'm using a jinja for loop to render each file object of the files array. So I'm rendering the file object name, size, and modified time inside each table row in a for loop. So let's try to reload our output now. And here you can see name, modified time, and size is being shown. But hey, let's try to differentiate between the file name and a folder name, right? So this is a file name and this is a folder name. So let's try to use some icons to show the type of the file. So in order to show the file icons, I'm going to use the Bootstrap icons library. So I've linked the CSS of Bootstrap icons using this link tag. So now I can add icons to my output. So while returning the name, size, and modified time, let's try to return icon also for each file or folder which we are iterating through this base folder path. So if you scan an object from this folder, it can be a file or a folder, right? So how can I differentiate whether the scanned object is a file or a folder? So for that, you can use the os.path.isdir of x dot path. So x.path gives you the absolute path of a file object. So it's a path like c, users, etc, etc .txt. If you input this x.path to the isdir function, it's going to give you a false if it is a file, if it's going to give you a true if it's a directory. So let's make use of this to decide whether the object is a file or a folder. So let's try to create an icon string which describes the icon which can be used for this object, and it can be something like a folder icon if the path is a folder, else it can be a file icon. But in the Bootstrap icons, to represent a folder, you can use an icon class something like this: bootstrap icon folder fill. This is the Bootstrap folder icon. So if I am having a path which is a folder, I can give this Bootstrap folder icon, and if I am having a path which is a file, I can give a file icon. So I've got my icon ready. So let's try to pass the icon also in my file object output. So f icon, the file icon would be the file icon string which I've created just now. So now I'm passing the file icon class to my template. So let's try to use that and create an icon accordingly while displaying the file. So first let me try to surround this file name inside a span, and inside the span let me try to give an icon here, and the class of the icon would be the class from the file object. So I'm just going to write file object of f icon. Instead of name, I'm going to write f icon, and I'm going to give you a small margin so that my icon and name will not be touching each other. So margin or else style equal to margin right, and let me make it 0.3 em. So I'm going to save it. So I got my file icons and folder icons so that I can differentiate between the files and folders. And even in the file types, you can have different icons based upon your file type extensions. So let's try to do that now. I've made a utility function called getIcon class for file name, which can determine the icon for the file based upon the file extension like .txt, .bmp, .jpg, etc. And it requires the path object, which can be imported from the pathlib module. So I'm just going to write from pathlib import path. So what it does is basically it derives the extension first and strips off the dot and matches with the bootstrap available icons, and if the extension is present in the bootstrap available icons, it's going to give the class something like bi file type, and if it's a AAC file type AAC, if it's a PDF file type PDF, and so on. And if it doesn't match with any of the bootstrap supported extension icons, it's just going to give the bi file EMR, which is the default file icon. Let's modify this f icon here. If the path is a directory, you're going to give bi folder fill class, but if the file is not a directory, if it's a file, let's try to use this function called get icon class for file name, and let's try to pass in our file name, which is x.name. Alright, let's try to reload our output now, and here you can see txt icon has come for the text, and if you have something like PDF, I can see some PDF icons, and you can customize your icons as per your design, but you can make it more complicated using some complicated icon sets also. Alright, now I'm able to see my folder. Let's try to fix the spacing also. Let me try to make it full screen. Let me try to make the table full screen so that I can utilize the whole screen space. For that, I'm going to open my Jinja template file and create some styles, something like page is going to be table layout fixed with 100%, and the TD and TH tags inside the table will have a word wrap so that I don't miss the words. It will be in the new line if the width is more, and I'm telling the text align to width left so that all my text is aligned to the left. I'm going to save this and I'm going to reload this output, and now you can see a more spaced file listing. But hey, we are not able to navigate in this, right? Because we don't have any links here. If I click this file, I should be able to download the file. So how can I do that? For that, you have to give a hyperlink for each file and folder type, and if the user click on the file should be downloaded, and if the user clicks on the folder should be opened. So let's try to create that now. So let's try to surround this span tag inside a hyperlink. Now this is my span tag which is displaying the file name, and let me try to surround it with an anchor tag so that I can create a hyperlink on this span tag. So user can click the link. I've got a hyperlink now, and this should be linked to the file path somehow, right? So in the href attribute, you have to give the file link. Let's make it empty right now, and let's try to save it and see how the output looks like. And you can see each item has a hyperlink, but it does nothing because we have given the path something like this hashtag. So how to fix this? So if I have a facility something like report/bin, it should go to the bin folder. So how can I do that now? Let's try to add another route here saying that report/, and I'm going to give a path here which is the URL path, and I'm going to declare that a variable called request path. So I'm telling after reports I can give more string which is of the pattern called URL path, and this will be passed into variable called request path. So let me try to copy this variable and paste it here. So now you will be provided with a variable called request path in this function. But if the user just goes to this reports tab, this path will be empty, right? So for that, I'm going to give it a default value. So I'm going to write defaults equal to, the variable name is request path, and it's going to be an empty string. So now if the user says report/path, the path will be captured and you can serve the path. But when the user says /reports/bin, it doesn't give you the whole absolute path like C users etc bin folder. It just gives you the relative path called /bin. So using this relative path called /bin, you have to be able to derive the file system path. So how can I do that? You can do that by using the safe join function inside the Flask module. So I'm going to just import the safe join function here, and I'm going to use this here. Safe join of the base path will be base folder path, and the path from the request was request path. So what this does is that if you have a relative URL in request called /bin, this will be appended to your base folder path, which is this folder path, and your resultant absolute path will be the path to the bin folder inside the server. So let's try to name this variable called absolute path, and now you got the absolute path of the file which you want to serve. So since I've got the absolute path, user can give something like /xyz also, which is not a valid path. So I have to check first whether this path is valid or not. So if I just write if os.path.exists of this absolute path, and if I write if not exists, this line can be triggered, and I'm going to write return abort. Abort is just like a 404 page where I'm going to pass the code, but abort function can be imported from the Flask module. So I'll just write abort here. So now what I'm telling here is that if I don't have the path which is a valid, I'm going to return 404 not found page. But if the path exists and if it's a file, I have to make the user download the file, right? So first let me check if the path is a file path, because it can be a folder path also, right? So I'll just write if os.path.is file of the absolute path, the user should be able to download the file. That means I have to send a file instead of a HTML page or something like that. So for that you have a very useful function called send file in Flask module, from using which you can send a file directly instead of a HTML page. So you can just write send file of the absolute path. So let's try to recollect what we've done here. If users visits a path called slash report slash something, first you find out whether the path is a valid path or not, whether this path is present in the server or not. And if it's a file, you just send the file to the user. Let me try to save this now. Okay, I'm getting the same page because I just forgot to write here return, because I have to return the send file, right? So I'm just saving it. And if I go to reports license.txt, I'm able to open the license file, and even I can save it here. Since it's a text file, it's open in the browser, but you can even save it by saving page as license.txt. So now we are able to successfully serve files also, but we did not create the hyperlinks as per the file paths, right? So let's try to create an attribute called flink, and here in the flink you just can't give x.path because it's going to be the absolute path of the server, but you have to give the relative path of the server, right? So for that you have a very handy function called os.path.rel path, which is going to give the relative path of this path with respect to the base folder path. So that means if the path is something like c users etc slash file.txt, it's gonna strip off the base folder path from that main path and just give you the relative path with respect to the base folder, which can be used in the URLs. So let me try to save this here, and in the template, instead of writing href of hash, I can just write file object of flink. So let me try to save this now, and let's try to reload the output here. And if I click the readme.txt, I can be able to see the readme.txt because I've given the right hyperlink here. But if I go to the bin, nothing happens because still we did not handle clicking the folder paths. Because if I click the path called bin, I'm able to see report slash bin, but I had to open the bin folder instead of the main folder, right? But I didn't do that. So how to solve this problem? It's pretty simple actually. Instead of scanning the base folder path, you can scan the base folder path plus the path which is given in the request, and that is basically the absolute path here. So just copy this and paste it here. If the absolute path is actually a file, it will be returned already. So this code will be met only when it is actually a folder path, because when it's a file path, the file is sent already, but this line will be triggered when it's a folder path. So now if you write something like slash bin, the contents of the slash bin will be displayed instead of the base folder path. So let's try to save this now. Let's try to reload our output, and you can see slash bin contents are being displayed. And if I go to the reports, the main contents, and if I go to the system folder, slash system folder contents are being displayed. But if I want to go to the parent folder again, I have to use this back button, or I have to remove this manually and show the reports folder. But I can give a link to the parent folder here so that user can easily navigate inside the page itself, right? So for that, I'm gonna create a link in the backend for the parent folder while serving this template. So let's try to create a variable called parent path. This is going to use the path of the absolute path, but get the parents of 0. But you can't give the absolute path, right? So you have to use the relative path. So for that, I'm going to use os.path.rel path of this path with respect to the base folder path. So this is the parent path. So let's try to inject that into a render template also. So parent path equal to parent path. So let's try to use this variable here. I'm going to use parent path. I'm going to use parent path as the first row of this table. So let's try to copy this row as it is and paste it here. And I'm going to remove the modified time and size, or else I'll make them empty. And instead of giving a link to the file object of flink, I'm going to give the link to the parent path. And in this span, instead of giving all these icons, I'm going to say parent folder. So basically I've created a new row above all the file content so that user can navigate easily into the parent folder. So let's try to save this, and let's try to reload our output. And here if I go to the parent folder, since I don't have any folder about reports, I'm going to the home page. But if I go to the bin and click the parent folder, I'm able to see the main reports folder. If I go to the bin, go into some other folder, something like system logs, I can even go to the parent folder. But while going to the parent folder, I'm getting issues because here I've given the hyperlink directly, but that's wrong. You have to give a rendered hyperlink, and that can be possible by using the URL for function. And URL for the name of the function which is handling the root, the name of the function is reports. So copy this reports, right? Reports, and the name of the variable which you want to pass to the URL, which is the request path. So copy the request path here, request path equal to the parent path. So now the URL will be correct and it will be rendered correctly by the Flask itself. So let's try to copy this URL for and use the same thing for the links of the files also. Instead of writing file object of flink, URL for reports and request path will be the file object of flink. So let's try to save this and reload our output. And if we go to the bin folder and the parent folder and some other folders, I'm getting the link right, but I'm getting an issue here. I'm using the backslash instead of the forward slash. So how to tackle that? It's really easy. While giving the links, just try to replace the backslash with a forward slash. And even while giving the link to the parent folder, just try to replace the backslash with the forward slash. And that's it. Let's try to reload our output now again. And if I go to the lib folder, I'm now seeing a forward slash. And if I go to the parent folder, I'm getting the things right because I'm not using a backward slash instead of the forward slash. And that's it, guys. You're able to see the folders and files and you're able to click them. And if I click on some files, something like this .bat file, I got to see the .bat file also. So in this pan, just beside the parent folder, give an icon of bootstrap folder symlink and save this. I'm just using the bootstrap icon here, and if I reload this, you can even see the icon for parent folder also. So that's it, guys. We have a working directory browsing or directory listing with Flask, and the best part is that it's really simple actually. You just getting the files and displaying them and doing some small things like readability and all. These all utility functions are just for readability, and the best part is you can actually control it as per your requirement. You can restrict the folders, you can restrict the file types, or you can give access control because the whole thing is implemented by you. Another thing you have to notice is that directory browsing is just a part of our application. You can use other URL paths also to do other things like forms, applications, etc. You're just using one segment of the URL to implement directory browsing. So you can mix directory browsing along with your application just by using functions like this in Flask. So this is the end output, and you can see I've created a blog post on directory listing in Flask. I have given thorough explanation of all the function used, something like os.scandir, os.stat, and I've even given you the sample codes so that you can try out each of the feature called os.stat or os.scandir. You can just practice those functions first and then get to the server code, which I've already kept it here. The whole server code, the whole templates code is kept here, and you can even customize it with your own CSS, like using Bootstrap or using some other CSS framework. I've just given you the bare bones. You can style it as per your requirements anyway. I've also given you the links to all the references of the functions which I've used in this directory browsing, so you can check out the references too. Please leave your valuable feedback or ask any doubts in the comment section. Hope you like this video, guys. Thank you for watching. Peace.